Out of around 700 soldiers who served as tunnel rats in Vietnam, 36 were killed and 200 wounded. That is a 33% casualty rate, 1 in 3. Their life underground could be measured in minutes, sometimes seconds, and they were called both the bravest and craziest men who fought in that war. But the reality of what they faced was far worse than most people imagine. And now, you are going to see why. When people talk about the Vietnam War, they usually mention major battles like the Tet Offensive or Hamburger Hill, but the war beneath the ground was something altogether different. The Cu Chi district sits about 40 kilometers northwest of what was then Saigon, in the middle of red clay soil and thick jungle. By the mid-1960s, that seemingly ordinary ground concealed one of the most sophisticated underground networks ever constructed in modern warfare. The Americans needed to control this area because it sat directly between Saigon and the Cambodian border. Enemy forces were using it to launch attacks on the capital, then disappearing before anyone could respond. If the Viet Cong controlled the tunnels, they controlled when and where battles happened. The Americans knew about the tunnels. They had bombed them, gassed them, and tried to flood them. But nothing worked. The Viet Cong had been preparing for this kind of warfare for over 20 years. First against the French colonial forces in the 1940s and 50s, then against the Americans in the 1960s. Instead of building fortifications on the surface where airstrikes could destroy them, they went deep underground. The tunnels were part of a defensive strategy that turned the entire region into a maze. Surface bunkers were vulnerable. Fixed positions could be targeted. So this time, they built something the Americans could not easily find or destroy. Their goal was to inflict casualties, drain resources, and make the war so costly that eventually the Americans would leave. American intelligence estimated the tunnel network covered maybe 50 kilometers. They underestimated that by a factor of 5. At its peak, the system stretched 250 kilometers, connecting bases from the outskirts of Saigon all the way to the Cambodian border. Over a decade of excavation had carved through the soft red laterite clay, which was perfect for tunneling. They built living quarters, hospitals, weapons factories, storage rooms, command centers, and escape routes that could shelter up to 16,000 fighters at once. Tunnel entrances were carefully concealed with trapdoors disguised by leaves and dirt. Ventilation shafts were built at angles to disperse smoke. Some entrances were so small that only one person could squeeze through at a time. When the Americans finally discovered the scope of the tunnels in January 1966, they launched Operation Crimp. 8,000 troops swept through Cu Chi with the goal of destroying the tunnel network once and for all. The operation began with massive B-52 bombing runs and artillery barrages. Entire sections of jungle were leveled. Chemical defoliants turned the landscape into a moonscape. By the time troops moved in, the surface looked completely destroyed, but almost nothing underground had been damaged. As soldiers began searching the area, they found small holes in the ground, some barely large enough for a man to fit through. At first, commanders tried pumping smoke grenades and tear gas into the openings. The gas would billow out from vents hundreds of meters away, revealing just how extensive the network really was. They tried sending in dogs, but the dogs either refused to enter or triggered booby traps immediately. They tried flooding tunnels with water, but the Viet Cong had built multi-level systems with drainage that made flooding ineffective. Then they realized someone was going to have to go down there. And that is when the tunnel rats were born. The biggest problem soldiers faced again and again was that the tunnels themselves were a maze. These were not simple shelters. They had hospitals, meeting rooms, sleeping quarters, kitchens with special chimneys that dispersed smoke to avoid detection, and storage areas packed with weapons and supplies. Some sections went 3 levels deep, as far as 12 meters underground. The tunnels twisted and turned, with sharp angles that prevented blast waves from grenades or explosives from traveling far. U-bends could be flooded in seconds to drown anyone inside. False passages led to dead ends or ambush points. Even if you cleared one section, enemy fighters could use connecting tunnels to appear behind you in areas you thought were secure. To effectively clear them, someone had to crawl inside, navigate the darkness, disarm traps, and engage the enemy in close quarters. But that was far easier said than done. First, you had to be small enough to even fit inside. The tunnels were built for Vietnamese fighters, most of whom were significantly smaller than the average American soldier. Then you had to survive long enough to accomplish your mission without getting lost, trapped, or killed. And even if you made it through, there was no guarantee the section you cleared would stay clear. Now, the volunteer soldiers who took on this job became the only real answer the military had, but it also came with odds that almost no one survived. To understand why being a tunnel rat was such a nightmare, we need to look at what the job required. Tunnel rats were generally men under 165 centimeters tall, roughly 5 foot 5 inches or shorter. They had to be slim, mentally tough, and willing to crawl into pitch-black holes where death could come from any direction. Most were engineers or infantrymen who volunteered, though sometimes. The smallest man in the unit was simply told he was going in. There was no formal training program at first. Early tunnel rats learned on the job. The equipment was minimal. You could not carry much in a space barely wide enough for your shoulders. A tunnel rat entered with only a pistol, a flashlight, a knife, and sometimes communication wire. The standard M1911 pistol was most common, but many tunnel rats hated it. The .45 caliber round produced a deafening blast and blinding muzzle flash in confined spaces. Firing it could leave you temporarily deaf and blind. Some bought or traded for .38 caliber revolvers with suppressors. Others carried sawed-off shotguns or .25 caliber pistols. The knife was often considered most reliable. It never jammed, never ran out of ammunition, and could probe for tripwires and booby traps. Your effective combat range was whatever you could reach in the dark. That meant getting within arm's length of the enemy, in a space where you could not turn around, could not retreat quickly, and had no backup. You had to crawl forward on your hands and knees, sometimes on your belly, through absolute darkness except for the narrow beam of your flashlight. Every few meters, you stopped to check for wires, for loose dirt that might indicate a trap, for any sound or smell that might warn you of danger ahead. Then you kept moving, knowing that around the next corner could be a grenade, a pungy stake pit, a venomous snake, or an enemy soldier waiting in ambush. Once you entered a tunnel, every Viet Cong fighter in the area knew what you were there to do. The second they realized a tunnel rat was coming, they prepared to stop you by any means necessary. The tunnels were their home ground. They knew every turn, every trap, every escape route. Some had lived underground for months, even years. Their eyes had adjusted to the darkness. Their hearing had sharpened. They could move silently through passages they had memorized while you fumbled forward with a flashlight that announced your position to everyone. The Viet Cong would set ambushes at choke points, waiting in side chambers or around blind corners. They would let you pass, then attack from behind. They would trigger traps remotely, collapsing sections of tunnel or releasing poison gas. If they caught you in a narrow passage, there was nowhere to run. You either fought and won in seconds, or you died. Being captured alive was a fear that haunted every tunnel rat. Because they invaded the Viet Cong's underground sanctuaries, tunnel rats were not treated as regular prisoners. If captured, the best you could hope for was a quick death. One tunnel rat recalled finding a captured American tied to stakes in a tunnel wall, left for days, slowly dying. Another story tells of a tunnel rat trapped by a collapse. His squad could hear him screaming for hours, but could not reach him. By the time they dug down, he was gone. The Viet Cong had pulled him deeper into the system. They never found his body. Everything about this job was terrible on multiple levels. The weapon you carried might save your life, or the muzzle blast might permanently damage your hearing and vision. The darkness was absolute, except when your light gave away your position. The air was thick and stale, sometimes laced with gas or smoke. You could not stand up, could not move quickly, could not escape if something went wrong. At that distance, in those conditions, you saw, heard, and smelled everything that happened. If you fired your weapon, you saw the enemy's face in the muzzle flash. If you used a knife, you felt every moment of the struggle. If you survived, you carried those memories for the rest of your life. Many tunnel rats described psychological effects that lasted decades. Nightmares, claustrophobia, hypervigilance, and survivor's guilt plagued those who made it out. Some could never enter enclosed spaces again. Others struggled with the moral weight of what they had done in the tunnels, even though they knew it was necessary. The tunnels themselves were full of additional horrors beyond enemy fighters. The Viet Cong were masters of booby traps, and they designed them specifically to kill or maim tunnel rats. Punji stakes, sharpened bamboo spears, often coated with feces or poison, were hidden in pits along tunnel floors. Step in the wrong place, and the stakes would pierce through your leg or foot, causing not just injury, but infection. Tripwires connected to grenades were strung across passages. Touch the wire and you had maybe 2 seconds before the explosion. Not enough time to escape in such a confined space. Some grenades were rigged inside cans, with the safety lever held down by the can itself. When a tripwire pulled the grenade out, the lever released and the grenade detonated instantly. The Viet Cong also used poison gas, pumping it into tunnels when they suspected a tunnel rat was inside. You could carry a gas mask, but it made breathing even harder and reduced your vision to almost nothing. Most tunnel rats chose to go without, gambling that they could detect the gas and escape before it killed them. Then there were the animals. Venomous snakes were deliberately placed in tunnels as living booby traps. The most feared were called 3-step snakes, because legend said you could only take 3 steps after being bitten before the venom killed you. Bamboo pit vipers were hidden in boxes triggered by tripwires, or tied by their tails to drop on a tunnel rat's head when a trigger was pulled. Scorpions were placed in wall crevices, or suspended in containers that would dump on anyone crawling below. Spiders, some as large as a man's hand, built webs across tunnel passages. Fire ants, giant centipedes, and swarms of bats filled some sections. One tunnel rat described crawling through a passage where thousands of spiders, fleeing monsoon rains, covered every surface. He had no choice but to keep moving, letting them crawl across his face and arms because his mission was not complete. The psychological impact of these encounters was sometimes worse than the physical danger. Even the tunnel structure itself was a weapon. Some tunnels were deliberately built poorly, so they would collapse under the weight of a larger American soldier. Others had trap doors in the ceiling or floor, allowing Viet Cong fighters to appear suddenly, attack, and vanish. U-bends in the tunnels could be flooded in seconds, trapping and drowning anyone caught in them. Ventilation shafts could be sealed, suffocating anyone inside. The walls were sometimes rigged with explosives that could be triggered remotely. Every step forward was a gamble. Every turn could be your last. Despite all the risks, tunnel rats were one of the only effective tools the American military had for dealing with the Cu-Chi tunnels. Traditional methods had failed. Bombing could not reach the deep levels. Gas and smoke were vented away through hidden shafts. Flooding was countered by drainage systems built into the tunnels. Only a human being, crawling through the darkness, could actually explore, map, and clear the tunnels. And the intelligence they gathered was invaluable. In January 1967, during Operation Cedar Falls, tunnel rats from the 1st and 5th Infantry discovered the Viet Cong district headquarters for Cu-Chi hidden deep underground. They found 500,000 documents, including maps of American bases, detailed troop movement plans, lists of sympathizers, and even assassination plots. That single discovery provided more intelligence than months of conventional operations. But even with successes like that, the casualty rate remained devastatingly high. The Australian tunnel rats who served alongside American forces compiled detailed records. The 33% casualty rate was staggering, but even more remarkable was that most casualties did not come from tunnel fighting itself. The majority were killed or injured above ground while clearing mines and booby traps in the jungle. The tunnel work alone would have produced even grimmer statistics. One tunnel rat summed up the mindset required for the job in a way that captured the fatalism they all shared. He said that you have to believe, and really believe, that you are already dead. Once you accept that you are a dead man walking, the job becomes easier. That acceptance was not bravado. It was a survival mechanism. If you went in expecting to come out, the fear could paralyze you. Some tunnel rats ate only Vietnamese food and wore captured enemy clothing so their scent would not give them away. Others learned to move by sound and touch alone, turning off flashlights to avoid being seen. After a year underground, some reported their hearing and sense of smell improved by 60%. They had adapted to an environment that should have killed them. The tunnel rats earned recognition that never matched their sacrifice. Only 5 military medals and 1 military cross were awarded to Australian tunnel rats between 1965 and 1971. American decorations were similarly rare. The units were informal, often operating without official designation. Their motto, non gratum annus rodentum, meant not worth a rat's ass. They wore unofficial patches showing a rat holding a pistol and flashlight. By 1969, the United States shifted tactics. Instead of sending men into the tunnels, they began using B-52 bombers to drop delayed fuse bombs on known tunnel complexes. The bombs would penetrate deep into the ground before exploding, collapsing tunnels from below. This approach was more effective than earlier attempts, but it came too late for many tunnel rats. The Cu-Chi tunnels had already served their purpose. They allowed the Viet Cong to launch the Tet Offensive in 1968, using the tunnels to position troops within striking distance of Saigon, even after massive American operations tried to destroy them. Sections of the tunnels remained operational until the end of the war in 1975. Today, parts of the Cu-Chi tunnel network have been preserved by the Vietnamese government as a war memorial. Tourists can visit the site and crawl through sections that have been widened and reinforced for safety. The tunnels are lit, cleared of traps, and monitored. Even in these sanitized conditions, many visitors find the experience claustrophobic and unsettling. They spend 15 minutes underground and emerge grateful to see daylight again. The tunnel rats spent hours, sometimes days, in those spaces.